I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Of course, we have this paradoxical perception towards Mediterranean history. The dominant political history is, of course, a history of conflict. It goes back, obviously, as you know, to the Punic Wars, and it goes also to the 14th century of history of Islamic European Christian conflicts as well. So political history is full of conflict instances, moments in Mediterranean history. But at the same time, there is a backdoor history that is not as dominant as the political history. And I'm going to take a very clear example. Here we have Roger II as a major conqueror in the Mediterranean. The political history of Norman Sicily is seen, especially from the perspective of the Crusaders and the historical phase of Crusaders, and Roger II actually features among the main potential conquerors in the Mediterranean. But in the backdrop, we have this very active exchange cultural context. As you may know, Sicily was seen as this space of concordia, and but I'm going to focus specifically on this map of Al-Idrisi because it's not only a map of the Mediterranean, but it shows us the Arabic component of a Christian European regime that was thinking of conquest, thinking of geography and cartography from the perspective of conquest, yet at the same time it incorporates within the identity of the regime a non-European component as an essential component. It's not only about Idrisi, by the way. Roger II's court was full of Arab-speaking intellectuals, poets, and so on and so forth. And as you may know, the architecture of Sicily is full of signs of Islamic architecture all over the place. So we have this dichotomy, this paradox throughout the Mediterranean history, a political history of conflict, a frontier. The Mediterranean is a frontier from a political point of view, but at the same time, it's a space of exchange. I don't have time here to go through maritime mapping of the Mediterranean, the exchange between Italian, Spanish maritime cartography and Arabo-Islamic, especially Andalusian cartography of mariners, especially beginning from the 14th, 15th centuries. And that actually shows us the lingua franca of so many mariners who were even sharing the terminology of maritime navigation, including names of winds on both the northern and southern shores. I'm going to jump, however, to the 19th century. I'm going to jump to the time when we're going to have this disruption, when we're going to have this shock by the southern Mediterranean states, many of them provinces, at least formally, of the Ottoman Empire. Their shock with this huge European dominant presence, which was empowered by the huge technological advance of Europe in the 19th century, beginning with Napoleon Bonaparte in the beginning of the 19th century, the French presence in Algeria. But what I'm going to focus on is that the fact that in the 19th century, and here we have few works based on the Tunisian archives, where we can see that illicit trade, contraband, including illegal immigration into Tunisia, was already happening from the northern side to the southern side. And this is well documented. I'm going to just bring one example. Tobacco was one of the merchandises that were traded, especially by British ships and Maltese ships, especially around the port of Sfax, and many of the tribes that are based in the south, including Nafet and others, were actually getting much of their tobacco through this illicit trade coming from Maltese ships and British ships. And this is only one example. We have many examples of that. Again, this is well archived in the documentation. So illicit trade illicit form of mobility was something that was happening on both sides. Of course, we have captives at the same time, human captives throughout the history, the modern history of piracy at that time, but before even modern piracy during the medieval times. But we have also exchanges of goods at the same time, not only human captives and human enslavement. This is just to touch on the complexity of the longue durée history. That is, what we're seeing now should not basically blind us towards this longue durée history of complexity, of exchange, illicit mobility going back and forth between the two sides. Now I'm going to focus on Tunisia's geopolitics, and especially how the frontiers of Tunisia were shaped through history, little by little. The land frontiers, especially with Algeria, was something unlike what Pan-Arabists say in Tunisia, that they were fabricated by colonialism. It's not actually the case. We don't have Sykes-Picot here. With regards to Tunisian, Algerian frontiers, the frontiers were built up through the modern times, especially with the known official agreements between the beys of Tunis and the days of Tunis and the days of Algiers in the beginning of the 17th century. We started having a little frontier on the northwestern part of Tunisia, and little by little frontiers are going to also be established on the Libyan-Tunisian borders, especially by the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, between the Ottoman rulers, that is the pre-Italian rulers of Libya and French colonial powers. But these frontiers were happening in spite of a reality of strong networks of tribal, societal, Sufi sometimes, relationships between both sides of the borders. It's true these borders were not fabricated by foreigners, but these borders were imposing themselves by the centers of the growing nation states on both sides of the borders, towards Algiers and towards Tripoli. They're imposing themselves on a very long durée network of tribal, societal, Sufi relationships. So they were enforcing themselves into a reality that was resisting them for a very long time. And that's why illicit trade now in Tunisia, with Algeria, with Libya, is not something that is recent. It's very organic in these border regions. It's very difficult to impose these frontiers. It has been the case, still the case, during Ben Ali's time. The regime was even establishing these illicit trade networks. They were happening under the supervision of the state. They were part of actually creating financial economic revenues in these impoverished regional border regions. So again, when we're talking about frontiers, very difficult to talk about clear limitations, topographic, geographic, or social limitations between different sides. And that actually also concerns the maritime side. The maritime side has been clearly shaped by the different Tunisian governments, that is, maritime frontiers through time, but they were certainly influenced by Tunisia's divide, Tunisia's geopolitical divide, the internal divide you mentioned, which is happening now. That is, we have like two Tunisia. It's very much rooted in Tunisia's history. It goes before the French, certainly, but the French occupation, colonization strengthened this internal divide between coastal regions and internal regions. The policies of the post-colonial state did the same, and with that, the maritime side, the coastal side, is going to be established as the basically more profiting, more benefiting from development than any other sides. But at the same time, it's the new economic model with the focus on tourism, and as I'm going to explain, textile industry, especially from the beginning of the 1970s, and the focus on exporting basically goods, either agricultural goods or industrialized goods, manufactured goods from Tunisia to Europe, is going to be the model. And this means that the governments, the different governments' security policy was always emphasizing high security along the coast, preventing any social instability, but especially preventing access of people illegally towards these sites of economy, profit, that is the different Tunisian ports, beginning from Tunis port and Reds port later. Now, at the same time, the new post-colonial state was developing. We're going to see this very interesting period of time when the Shibanis, or the Tunisian workers in the 1950s and 60s, when they were welcomed into the workforce in Europe at that time. Here, of course, the workforce is cheap, not skilled workforce was on high demand because it was very close. And at the same time, there was the demographic decline, demographic issues with World War II, and the demographic impact of World War II that created a void welcoming these North African migrants. At that time, the visa issue was not there. Until 1958, Tunisians can use carte d'identité simply to travel to France. Then beginning from 1958, they're going to have to use passports with visas, but even then, I mean, getting a visa was not a big problem. And each time we're going to see a new consular measure, visa measure. It was very much related to French-Tunisian political crisis. In 1958, it was because Tunisia was supporting the Algerian resistance. 1963, because Tunisia nationalized French agricultural properties that were owned by French settlers, and so on and so forth. Each time we're going to have a crisis between Tunisia and France, a new visa or a new diplomatic measure, consular measure, would be introduced at the same time, pushing the access, or closing a bit the access towards the job market, the French job market, in front of Tunisian workers, but the access is still there. Situation is going to change beginning from the 1970s, when we're going to have an externalization of the demand for cheap workforce. What's going to happen by the 1970s? We're going to have two major laws: the 1972 law, the 1974 law, that are going to establish textile industries destined for exportation from Tunisia. European capital is going to basically start to outsource to Tunisia by that time, and we're going to search this cheap workforce in Tunisia. At the same time, we're going to have increasing basically difficulties for Tunisians to access the European, including the French job market. This is going to get to its apogee by 1995, when the Schengen Accords are going to be established. As borders within Europe are going to disappear, more and more borders between Europe and the southern part of the Mediterranean is going to establish. A new deal is going to happen between European governments, led by the French, in the middle of the 1990s with the new authoritarian regime of Ben Ali. That is, the deal is very basic. You're going to provide for us security. We're going to basically limit access to our job markets. And at the same time, we're going to basically help you with financial support. That's basically the deal, which is not very far from what's happening now after the June agreement last summer. I'm going to jump to basically the last section of the talk. What happened in July 2023 in Carthage is certainly a major milestone in the relationship between Tunisia and the European Union. Before that, what we had during the democratic transition, what we had is very limited agreements, basic agreements that enforced European barriers without having a comprehensive agreement with the government. Due to internal political divisions in Tunisia, it was very difficult to achieve this comprehensive agreement with the Europeans. Here I'm going to just say a few words about populism. Populism, which of course, depending on your definition, my definition of populism is that it's a political tactic rather than a thin ideology, rather than a system, a harmonious system of political action. It's a tactical, it's a political tactic used in specific contexts, specific circumstances to take advantage of certain political opportunities. That's mainly the definition I would adhere to when it comes to populism. And this is not only Qais Said. This is, I mean, the whole post-revolutionary context was a ripe context for this kind of thing. That is, this political tactic that would say that I am the people, I am serving the people against an elite that is conspiring against the people. This is something that has been embraced sometimes even by groups that would be perceived mainly mainstream as elitist, but in certain circumstances they would use that. And this is just to say that rather than focusing on Qais Said, let's focus on the political context creating this need for dichotomy between the people and the elite. And it's mainly economic difficulties, the difficulties to deliver on economic social reforms that would actually make some of these political actors opt for this political tactic, that is a dichotomy and increasing conflicts within any society rather than actually delivering on economic and social solutions. And Qais Said, when he came to power in 2019, he was one of many populist candidates who were basically embracing the same basic political tactic, but with different ideological affiliations. Populist candidates in 2019 got more than 50% in the presidential, when put together, they got more than 50% in the first round in the presidential elections. And Qais Said was just ranking first in this long line of populist actors. So the problem really in Tunisia is not populism. It's not the rise of populism. The problem in Tunisia is a structural. It's a structural crisis in development that goes back to the post-colonial state, structural division within the country between the coastal areas and the internal areas, and inability to deliver solutions on these structural problems, long-duty problems, is the main reason for populist actors to thrive. And these populist actors, they would use populism as a political tactic, but at the same time, in terms of action, they reproduce elitist policies. And this is why some people would say, well, Qais Said is not true to himself. It's not about himself. It's not only about Qais Said. This is the usual populist tactic, that is a discourse embracing the political populist idea, I am the people against a conspiring elite, but at the same time, security-wise policies when it comes to immigration. This is the norm. It can go a little bit to the left, it can go a little bit to the right, but it's not specific to him. It's specific to this inability, long-duration inability to solve these problems, these structural problems which are going to basically deepen in the coming years and decades for demographic structural issues in Tunisia. You know, Tunisia's paradox is that it's an aging society like Italy, but doesn't have the economic resources of Italy and the European governments. And at the same time, it's facing a growing sub-Saharan African presence, turning into settlement, because Tunisia's policy now is preventing them from leaving the country, but it cannot actually drive them back. So we're starting to see clearly the process of large settlements of sub-Saharan Africans, and this is going to be basically responding to a local economic need of entrepreneurs searching for a cheap workforce. This is already happening in the olive trees plantations around Sfax, in which sub-Saharan Africans actually salaries or daily fare is largely less than Tunisians' salaries. And this is the actual root-based conflict that's going to happen in the coming years. And this is the main structural reason why we're going to hear racist discourses. It's not Qais Said who's creating a racist discourse. He might be basically deepening that, but the structural reason for a growing racist, nationalist, sovereignist position is this structural conflict and structural problem. And this is not the structural problem only of Tunisia, it's of a whole region. The water stress that is happening and that we actually expect to deepen in the whole region, not only in Tunisia, in the coming years, is one of the reasons of illegal immigration. Illegal immigration partly now is described as climate-driven immigration. Climate refugees is one of the new terms basically describing what's happening. And this is not only for Tunisia. The only difference is that Tunisia's demographics is declining, but Africa's demographics is booming. And when water stress is happening in sub-Saharan Africa, we're going to see more and more sub-Saharan Africans coming to Tunisia. One final point, I'm going to finish with that. The region is divided. That's a major also structural problem when it comes to the Maghreb. And Tunisia is interacting with that. It's dealing with the impact of this big divide between two poles within the Maghreb. That is Algeria, basically trying to establish this kind of tripartite alliance with Tunisia and Libya. Objectively, it can enforce that in Tunisia for a very simple reason, because the balance of power in terms of energy, in terms of politics, in terms of military power is in favor of for the Algerian. So Tunisia is by default an Algerian ally. The Western Libyan government is basically the same due to internal Libyan division and foreign intervention in Libya. On the other side, we have Morocco with the new Middle Eastern comers, on the top of which is the UAE as a major active political player in sub-Saharan Africa, supporting the Moroccan role. And this division is also a division of how the Maghreb is dealing with sub-Saharan Africa. The best example is, of course, the Trans-Saharan pipeline coming out of Nigeria. We have two ones. So one that is going through the sea, another one going through the land. So one goes through Algeria and the other one goes through Morocco. And Europe, of course, is playing with both sides, depending on the balance of power. The Italians are closer to the Algerians, the French are becoming much closer to the Moroccans, and so on and so forth. So Europe itself is divided following this big divide. So these are just few points that I wanted to mention, not necessarily a wholly model to understand the whole issue, but this might actually help us try to understand this. Again, this is not the mounting tension is not due to political discourses or to populism. Populism itself is just an outcome of deep, long durée structural issues and conflicts in the region. Thank you.